Finding yourself the prey in the talons of an owl on a dark night is a gruesome affair. The owl will rip you to pieces or eat you whole. Then it will digest you later to spit up a compacted pellet of what was your fur and bones. Then the owl kicks back, rolls itself a cigarette, and smokes it while listening to the wolves howl. This is the smoking owl. I've been an avid fisherman my entire life. I have pictures of my 1-year-old self fishing with my dad at the family pond. I caught my first saltwater catfish when I was 6. The next year, I landed my first 5-pound bass. By the time I was 13, I was hooked, pun intended. I fish as many weekends as I can while still being a good husband and father. When you have fished as much as I have, there are plenty of stories to tell. I could tell the one about when I accidentally dragged a cottonmouth into my boat. I could explain how I almost snagged a deer swimming across a lake, or how a beaver scared the crap out of me while I was night fishing last year. Those stories are good small talk, but one story stands above the rest. I put my boat in before the sun was up. Having fished the lake dozens of times, I knew all the great spots. The water was calm. After a quick prayer, I left the dock and headed to the northeast section of the lake. By the time the sun had shown her full face, I had caught 3 bass. Not needing the meat, I threw them back, hoping that one day I would catch them again and they'll grow till 10 pounds. By 9 o'clock, the water was getting choppy from wind and other boats. I moved to a cove to hide against the turbulent water. My depth finder showed 7 feet and revealed all the fallen trees under my boat, which is a perfect place for a bass to hide waiting for prey. As I continued farther into the cove, I spotted a bright orange boat pulled onto the bank. An older man sat in the boat cutting bait. He had an old cheap rod and reel laid across his lap and fish blood on his jeans. A true fisherman. I was pulling my spinnerbait through the water when I noticed the man waving his arms. I pulled over to the bank and he said his battery died and eagerly asked if he could fish with me. I felt empathic when I saw his brow covered with sweat from all the work of cutting his bait, so I agreed, and a smile skimmed across his face. He brought in a covered bucket of bait, a rod, and a reel, and a tackle box before settling in on the bow of my boat. After we had a few laughs, we set off down the lake to another cove I enjoyed fishing in. Over the next 3 hours, we caught almost 20 fish, and I got to know my new friend well. His name was Russell, and he was 58 years old. Not only did he enjoy fishing, he did it to get away from his wife of 40 years, who, in his words, never stopped gripping. Russell joked about how terrible his wife was, but I could sense the love behind the insults. You don't stay with someone that long if you're not in love. I admired him for celebrating his 40th anniversary the previous week, even though the passion had diminished. His humor made Russell instantly likable. His jokes were plentiful, and he always had a funny comment for everything I said. Thick wrinkles around his cheeks were proof of a lifetime of smiles. As time drifted into the afternoon, Russell and I continued catching fish. My spinnerbait let me down, so Russell was kind enough to lend me some of his bait. I knew he was a smart man when he wouldn't tell me his secret recipe. The smell of the bait bucket was pungent since it was full of strips of meat and blood. Perfect ingredients to attract fish. The bait fit on the hooks easily, but was tougher than any cut bait I had used. With all the fish we were catching, I tried pestering him with the secret, but was only answered with laughs. The texture felt familiar, so my guess was pork. Who would have thought fish loved pork so much? By this time, our total was 47 fish, and the bait was running as low as the sun. With the excitement of catching fish, it's easy to forget how dehydrated someone can get from being in the sun all day. So I shared with him some of my water. We swapped some jokes and shared some more stories. I even told him the one about the cottonmouth being dragged onto my boat. We caught a few fish to finish up the bait and then headed back to the first cove where his boat was sitting on the bank. As we got closer, I started wondering if I should help him retrieve his boat from the bank. To haul off a dead boat the size of his is a hassle with 2 people, but near impossible for 1 person. Even though my legs were tired and a headache had set in, I knew I couldn't leave my new friend without help. As we rounded a stone embankment, his boat came into view. I told him I would be happy to assist him any way I could. That's when I noticed the smile wrinkles disappeared. His bright orange boat flickered with blue light from a dozen police cars. As we approached the scene, several cops with flashlights started directing us to approach slowly. I never said a word. The look on Russell's face answered any questions. His stare was as cold as his expression. The friend I picked up hours earlier had quickly become a stranger again. We were arrested and separated after docking. While being hauled off to a cruiser, I saw several cops searching Russell's boat. The whole sequence felt like a dream until I started asking officers for clarification. After 15 minutes of imagining what the inside of a prison cell would be like, an officer asked me to explain what I was doing with Russell. After my brief explanation, he informed me that my story corroborated with Russell's, so the handcuffs were removed. The officer explained to me that Russell stabbed his wife to death. Knowing he had to remove any evidence, he cut her up and used her flesh as fish bait. He came back every day to fish, hoping eventually any evidence of his wife would be gone. Instead of burying her, Russell used a method he enjoyed. The officer said they only found her body because her sister called the police when her phone calls went unanswered. When they searched the home, Russell had already fished away half of her body. After being told I could give my testimony the next day at the police station, I was allowed to leave. I started feeling sick when I remembered how much I handled the bait with my bare hands. My stomach dropped to my knees when I saw Russell in the cruiser backseat laughing hysterically. Smoking Owl here. Please be careful around any fishermen that you may run into who use a bucket of pork meat for bait. I will soon be narrating another amazing story by this author, DrElsewhere, about a wealthy man whose wicked shopping habit leaves him searching dark corners of the world for the ultimate bragging rights. So check in again soon and be sure to subscribe.